A common feature that we want in games are visual effects like these dust effects when our player jumps and lands on the ground. And this can be pretty straightforward, but there's some ways that we can build this to make it more modular and easier to use across and throughout our game. So by the end of this video, you'll be able to design and implement visual effects that are easy to use and reuse by using a visual effects manager or a factory pattern. The intent of this is to replace this need to build these effects within our player scene and instead make it a global scene that we can call from any entity. That means that this effect could be used by an enemy or by something falling. And in addition to the dust effect, we'll go ahead and build this screen shake effect that's going to be utilizing that same visual effect module to trigger it. And this is going to set us up to be able to do the same kind of functionality for particle effects in the subsequent episode here. The goal: be able to spawn one of these effects from any node or entity using a single line of code. Hi, my name is Michael. Join me as we build an epic Metroidvania game in Godot 4 using GDScript. This is the Metroidvania Forge. Okay, to illustrate the common problem here, if we've got a player that can jump, and this is just a rudimentary animation, we want to be able to add a dust effect. Now, the obvious way to approach this is just to have the player spawn that dust effect on his own whenever he lands on the ground, right? Now, the problem arises when you have multiple players or entities, maybe your enemies start wanting to spawn that same effect. And on top of that, maybe you've got falling blocks, and when they hit the ground, you want that same dust effect. Well, now you've just taken one effect and you have to instantiate it and control it and play it back in at least 3 different places, and it starts to get out of hand. And so what a factory does is it allows us to simplify this process and abstract that creation of these different products from the player or the entities. So in this example, as the player jumps right when he hits the ground, a message gets sent up to the visual effects factory. Okay, that says, hey, I need to create this dust effect. And in return, the visual effect factory will spawn a new instance of that dust landing effect. And what this allows us to do is then if we have a different entity that needs that same effect, all they have to do is call that same one line of code to the visual effects factory, and they too can have that dust effect. And now the beauty of this is not only that it's easy to reuse across entities, but also if we decide we need to change how the dust effect works or looks, now every entity that uses it will also see that new changed effect. So it's really going to simplify your workflows on 2 fronts. Well, first thing we need to do before we really get into this is just some of that basic setup that we often do. So I'm going to bring in the assets that you can grab from the itch.io page, which is linked in the description. And what we're going to bring in is just a subset of the chapter 4 assets. And I'm going to, in my general folder here, I'm just going to create a new folder for some sprites, because I've got several of those. So I'm just going to go ahead and show this in File Manager. All right, and then open up my zip file. Here we go. So you can see in this Chapter 4 Player Abilities Asset Pack, we've got an audio folder, icons, and some sprites. Now you can bring in some of these things now if you want to. Really what I'm focused on is the dust effects and these destructible props. I'm going to bring both of those in here to my general sprites folder because we are going to reference both of those from within our visual effects system. We're going to use these dust effects for things like our jump and land, as well as when we hit things. And then this is blurry, but you can see we've got some things up here. We'll use some of these for our particle system as well. So make sure you get those brought in. And then the last bit of setup that we'll do is we'll create a new global, because since we're going to be using a factory pattern, we want a global script that we can access to generate these items. So this will be our factory, but I'm going to go ahead and create a folder for this one because there's going to be a little bit more involvement. And so this is going to be our visual effects. Now you could add a name like factory or something like that if you want to. I don't really think that's necessary. And then I'm just going to go ahead and create a new script called visual effects. And there we go. Okay, so this is the script that we'll use to start building that global visual effects system, the factory system that we're going to use. Okay, so this visual effects script, as you are thinking about this, really the intent here is that because this is going to be that factory, its sole purpose is to create and set up these different visual effects that we're going to have, okay? So we're going to be building first the dust effects that we'll use when our player jumps and lands on the ground, as well as in the future when we attack and hit things. And we're going to need to build a little bit of a separate thing to test it for now, but that's okay, we'll get there. But this script has that single purpose, right? And then obviously what that does is make it so that if any entity in our game, whether it be the player or an enemy or just an object, needs one of these effects, it's one script call away, okay? So we're not going to give this a class name. Let's go ahead and set this up. And I'm going to go ahead and remove all of this. We can leave that it extends node. And just going to call this VisualEffects just a comment, just because in your script editor, when you're looking at it, it might make it a little bit easier to tell what you're doing, but really not necessary. So when we look at this, obviously the first product that this factory can generate is going to be those dust effects. So I'm going to just make a comment here that we can create dust effects, and I'm probably going to separate that out. We're going to have multiple types of effects, but I am going to build some basic functionality into this script so that we can create any type more easily. So in addition to the create dust effects, which will become a function, we'll also have down here the ability for us to create a specific type. So we might have something like create jump dust, or, you know, we've got another one which will be when we land. And lastly, we'll have that what I'm going to call the hit dust. Okay. So these are going to each become little functions within this script that we can call. And let's go ahead and configure this to be a global script before we move any further. So I'm going to go up to my project settings and globals, just load this guy up. Okay, so where are we? VisualEffects, grab that script, and that is a good name for me. So I'm gonna go ahead and add that, and there we go. Okay, so now as we create these functions, you guys are already familiar with these global scripts, right? We'll be able to call them from anywhere. So I'm going to stub in this function for the create dust effects so that we can just make sure that this works. And then we're going to build out how the dust effect works. And I'm going to try and do it in a kind of quick fashion. So this function will be called create dust effect. And let me explain this a little bit further. So this function, it's going to create a new instance of a dust effect, and then it'll return that instance to the other function. So when we do create jump dust, it's going to use this create dust effect to get the basic effect, and then it'll know that it needs to be of type dust or whatever. Okay, so what that means is this needs to have a return of a new type. Right now I'm just going to say that returns a node 2D, but we're going to update this because it's going to be a special class that we create. So what we would do here then is we're going to like instantiate a thing. We'll need to add it to the scene tree. We're going to need to position this, and then finally we can return it. And I'm just going to put a pass on here for now. And what I'm going to need to do, I also want to configure the argument that we need for creating a dust effect. So it's going to need that position, like where are we creating this effect in the game world? Okay, so we can just call this POS for position, which will be a vector 2. Okay, and I'm actually going to give this an underscore so that it hides it from other external scripts, because the intent for the create dust effect is not for external scripts to call it as much as it is for use of this VisualEffects script. Okay. But just for fun, let's go ahead and I'm going to just set this to void real quick, and we're going to have to change that back again. And I'm just going to do a print statement so that we can see if it works. Okay. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to just stub in the create jump dust. Okay, so again, this isn't going to do anything really yet, but it'll illustrate how this is going to flow. So I think I'm going to just call this function jump dust. And obviously, if we want a position, I'm going to go ahead and keep that same argument so that anything that calls jump dust is going to pass in an argument. And then here it can essentially just call create dust effect. And it's going to need to provide this position, right? And then we're going to just have one extra line of code per effect type. So what we're going to be creating with this is we'll create a simple reusable scene that has the 3 dust effects built in, and they're each going to have a different animation. And so we'll just trigger a different animation based on the type that we want in this line of code. And then everything else will happen here. So each of these 3 functions, now I could just go ahead and just copy and paste this, for example, and change the name. And all we have to do with each of these is one extra line of code, and then creating the new instance, the positioning, etc., will all happen in this one basic function here. Okay. Now, because we are going to want a way to be able to test these different effects that we create, I'm going to go ahead and open up my player UI, or the player HUD, I should say. So if we look at this scene, I'm going to just add some buttons here that I can click, and these are going to be temporary. We're going to get rid of them eventually. So I'm going to do something a little bit different that I don't normally do, but let's just get a button here. It says test dust. Let me just drag it over here to the top right. And now I'm going to do something that I don't normally do in my tutorials. I think it's generally a bad practice, but for certain things it's useful. And in this situation, I want to add a specific type of script. So I'm going to go here and say attach script. And then there's this built-in script option. And you'll notice when I check that, it's no longer going to create a file. Okay, I'll go ahead and say create. What this means is this script that it just created, you can see it's attached to the button. Technically, this script code is part of the button. It's like baked into this scene's resource file, okay? Pros and cons. The pro to this, in my opinion, is it's just good for quick, dirty work like this. We're just gonna have a button that needs to do a thing. We just wanna be able to test something real quick. The cons is it's really not friendly for building a full game. It's hard to find the script because the only way to find it is to come to the button and look at it there. It's just not a great way to do things, but we're going to use it in this case just to hook up a button so that we can click it and have it do a thing. And then when we delete it, it's gone. So we're not creating a script that we have to go through and delete later. We can just delete this little button, okay? So what I'm going to do from this button is I'm going to connect to its pressed signal. So whenever the button is pressed, we want to just call one of those dust functions so that we can start testing, okay? So what we'll do is we'll just say pressed, because this is a button, .connect, and then we'll make a new function on pressed. We don't need this here. Okay, there we go. So here, instead of just printing a test to see if this is working, I'm going to grab my VisualEffects global and we'll just use jump dust as our example. And then a global position, we need to pick something so like when we're testing, we can hopefully see this. Let's do this. Let's just get a reference to our player. So I'm going to just get tree dot get first node in group and player, and then I can just use his global position because that's actually how it's going to work eventually when we hook this up. So this will look a little bit more accurate. Okay, so we're going to use the player's global position, pass that in. We aren't going to be actually displaying anything yet. So really what we should get is if this code works, the jump dust should then call create dust, which is going to print a message to create dust effect. Okay, and now I'm going to pick a scene here and just run this. And we can see, just look at the console here, when I click test dust, create dust effect, okay? So what we've done is we've decoupled already that visual effect triggering from any entity. So now the player, if he needs to create a dust effect when he lands, we just have one line of code that we can call, and then everything else gets handled from within our factory script, right? So that's good that this is working because now we can start building and start testing. Now, the next step with this is obviously this VisualEffects factory. It's going to be creating something. And so generally what we're going to want in the case of this game are some scenes that it can preload and instantiate. So let's proceed by building this scene for our dust effects. Underneath my VisualEffects folder, I'm going to create a new scene. I'm just going to call this my dust effect. There we go. And let's create what this effect looks like. Now, actually, I guess instead of a node 2D, I want this to be a sprite 2D. So I'm going to go ahead and change the type of this node. Okay. It's going to be our dust effect. And then let's find, and in fact, we can just probably do this quick load option and type in dust. We've got our dust effects. We're going to use this sprite sheet. So this sprite sheet is laid out with 3 animations that each consist of, I think it's 8 frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 3 rows. So, right, this is our jump on the top, this is the land in the middle, and the hit at the bottom. So let's go ahead and just configure this real quick. Our texture has 8 frames across and 3 vertically. And there we go. Then the next bit that we need is just to add an animation player. You could make this an animated sprite 2D if you want. I think that's fine as well. Your code on it is going to change slightly, but I'm going to go ahead and just configure these animations real quick for the 3 effects. And so we'll have a jump, a land, and a hit animation. So I'm going to come down here and just create a new one. I'm going to start with jump because that's the first thing that we've got here. And all we really need to animate are the frames. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to configure my ticks to be 0.05. Make sure I turn on my snapping and then just select the dust effect. And I'm going to just key the frames. And yeah, I do want to create a reset track. So let's see. Boom, 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 boom. Let's go ahead and zoom in and take a look at that. Okay, so we've got an animation. You can see it's only, you know, like half a second, less than half a second, right? 0.4 seconds maybe. What I'm going to do is I'm going to probably just set the duration of this to 0.5. I mean, I guess we could make it 0.4. I don't know. And let's just go ahead and look at the animation. Boo, boo. Okay, so every time we jump, it can make a dust effect like that. And obviously, we'll have it get freed after that last frame. So pretend that it goes invisible after that. And there we go. So now I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate this and create the other three or the other two animations. So there's going to be the land and the hit. And this is pretty straightforward. This just simply starts at keyframe 8 for the land. Okay. There we go. There's our little land animation. It's just like a little dust poof with some particle looking pixels popping out. And lastly, this hit animation, I'm going to just do the same thing. Delete those frames. Set this to, what is that, 16? Starts as a circle. And let's just frame it out. Is there another frame? No, there's not. Okay, there we go. So this is the effect when we hit something. And now we're ready. Now I want to also add a script to this DustEffects because we need a way to be able to control the animation. And I want to make that as easy and seamless as possible. But in addition to that, because we're generating these effects as we're playing the game and any entity can call it, we want them to be responsible for clearing themselves so that we don't have to keep track of them and do stuff like that, right? Like if the player landed and created a dust effect, we don't want the player node to now become responsible for clearing it when it's done. And likewise, we don't want to end up with like 1,000 invisible sprite 2Ds all over the screen. Eventually, that could potentially cause performance issues, right? So we'll build a script that's going to help us handle those issues. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just attach a script here then. I want to make sure I turn off built-in script. We don't want that in this case. And you can see it's going to put it in the VisualEffects folder and call it DustEffect, and that is perfectly fine by me. And I'm going to give this one a class name. Okay, so this is our dust effect. It extends a sprite 2D. Now I want to create an enum that represents the types that it can be so that it's easier to access and change the type through script. And then aside from that, we basically just need to have a function where we can kind of set up or start the effect. And so let's just go ahead and create a start function to begin. This is different than ready. This is different than those other built-in functions because we want to call this one on our own timing and we want to be able to provide the type. Okay, so I'm just going to start though with a basic function of start. And then let's do those other things I mentioned. So we're going to have an enum and we'll just call this type. So there's going to be a few types, right? And the types that we want are jump, land, and hit. And then let's go ahead and grab a reference to our animation player because we will need that to play back the animation. Now all we need to do here is in our start, we need to request that we provide that argument. So the parameter telling us what type of jump it is. So we can just say the type is of type. Dippity type. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start by selecting or setting an animation name, just a string, anim name. And I'm going to set it equal to jump by default. And then we'll do a match statement against our types here and adjust the animation name. And then when we're done, we can just play it back, right? So let's go here and just say match type. Now, if it is type dot, we already have jump in there, so we may not want to change it, but actually I do. I want to just throw one little bit in here. We already have an animation name, but going back and looking at this, like this hit animation being at the origin there is really good. But when we go spawning our land and our jump, you can see like this is the center. So when we provide a position, it's going to position this node based on this center point right here. So that being the case, our jump animation and our land animation are going to be offset awkwardly if we don't do something about that. So what I'm going to do is just handle that real quick in the script here. So if the type is jump, then I'm going to just take the position Y and I'm going to subtract 14. So what this means is we'll position this node in the world, right, in our other script, but then when we call start, it's going to update the position if it's a jump type. And we'll also do this same bit of code if it's a land. So if it's type.land. Now, technically, you might want to move it up 16 pixels. You can adjust this as needed in your own game, right? But this is just how we'll adjust the Y. But in addition to the positioning with the land type, we also need to change the animation name. So we'll just set anim name equal to land. And then lastly, we have our hit type. Okay, so if it's a hit type, we set the anim name equal to hit. Is that what we call them all? Yeah. Okay, there we go. Now I do want to do one other fun thing with the hit type. We're going to just add a tiny bit of flavor, and I'm going to randomly rotate it. So I'm just going to say rotation underscore degrees equals, and then I'm going to use this I'm going to use a random integer range because I want to only rotate it at 90-degree intervals so that it keeps its pixel appearance. Okay, so I'm going to do a random number between 0 and 3. And random integer, so it can be 0, 1, 2, or 3. And then we'll just multiply this by 90 degrees. And there we go. We've got a random rotation. So once we've determined the type and adjusted our configuration a little bit further, now all that's left to do is to animate it, play the animation, and then cue free it when it's done. And because we're using animations, we can just rely on that animation to know when it's finished. So we'll say animation player dot play. And then in this case, we'll pass in the anim name. Okay, so it's going to be one of those. And then we can add and await. So this becomes an asynchronous function. It's going to wait for a condition, which will be the animation player dot, not anim name, animation player dot finished, animation finished. That's what it is. Okay, so it's going to wait. And then once it's finished, we can just call cue free. Okay, there we go. Pretty simple little script, and it does the things that we need. It allows us to configure a different visual, some customization based on the type, play an animation, and then cue free the node. Okay, so now that we've built this dust effect and we've got our visual effects scene, we're ready to try tying it together, see if we can get it to work. We've almost come full circle with this dust effect already. It's been pretty quick. A couple things that we need to do. Our visual effects currently doesn't have any knowledge of the dust effect. So let's get a reference to that here. So I'm going to come down and grab my dust effect scene, hold control, drop it in. Okay, so now it's going to preload this dust effect. It means we'll have the scene in memory. We can instantiate it quickly at any point. And then down here, we're going to update this create dust effect mostly. So this is now going to return a dust effect node. Okay. And we can replace each of these lines of code one by one. Obviously, we're getting an error because we're not returning anything. That's the last step here. I'm going to remove this print statement. Okay, create new dust instance. This is going to be a new variable. We'll just call it dust, and it's going to be of type dust effect, and it's going to equal dust effect dot instantiate. Okay, very straightforward. We've just created a new instance of the scene that we have stored here. Then next, we want to add this to the scene tree. I'm just going to go ahead and use add child dust. Then if for some reason in the future we wanted to, this global scene will still have all of these effects added as a child somehow. Now we need to position the node. And so I'm going to just say dust dot global position equals POS. So whatever position we pass in is where we will place this in the world. And then lastly, we can remove the pass and return the node here. So we'll just say return dust. Okay, there we go. Now I think we're going to have some minor visual issues we're going to need to adjust with this dust effect, but we'll get to that in a second. So now we've got a jump dust, and I think that's the one we were calling on that little button, right? In our player HUD. Yeah, jump dust. So we're creating that, we're returning it. Now the only thing we need to do, because remember our dust effect is expecting us to call this start and select a type. So instead of just create dust effect, we're going to actually assign this to a variable like so. Okay, so now we're taking this dust, assigning it to a variable so we can access it, and we'll just say dust.start. And we can access that enum from within the dust effect by calling dust effect.type dot, and then we can say which one we want. So this is jump. There we go. So we just pass in that jump. So technically now, if we've got this set up, we should be able to see this dust effect. So I'm going to go ahead and just load a scene. Let's see what happens. I'm not seeing it, but I do think it's working. So what I want to do is I want to go here and check our dust effect. Now, one thing that we have to keep in mind is when we're instantiating nodes or scenes into our game world, we have to consider the z-index. This is a really common like fake bug. Like you're like, it's not instantiating. Where is this? And this happens to me all the time, way more than it should. But in reality, I believe what simply is happening right here is our dust effect is on a visibility layer that's probably going to show up behind the level. So what I'm going to do is just come in here. I've selected the dust effect root node. Just come down to the canvas item settings, right? And there's this ordering, and we'll set the z-index to 2. Save that, and I'm going to run the project again. Now, hopefully this works this time. Ah, there we go. You can see wherever my player is, it's spawning a jump effect every time I click the button. Okay, pretty nice, pretty cool. We've managed to create something. Now all we have to do is call a different function, right? If I wanted to come in here to, let's go to the scripts and just pull up this goofy little script. And I'm going to change this from jump dust to land dust. Save that and go back. Oh, I don't know if that's working. I don't know if is this one going to work? It might not work. And so let's just run. We'll just have to run the project again. Should work. Oh no. That's not working so good. Let's try. What the heck? Oh, I know why. I think that should be obvious. I'm just getting way ahead of myself. If we look at our visual effects node, we haven't finished implementing land dust or hit dust, but that's easy. It's, well, let's copy both these lines of code, right? Because we need to adjust this line here. I'm just going to go ahead and paste these in. Now all we have to do for these is change this. So this is land, and this is hit. Okay, let me go ahead and run this one more time. I think we're going to be showing, there we go. There's the land effect. Okay, you see that happening there at the bottom? It's kind of hard to see with the glow. Now this button press is going to be more useful for a couple of our effects later on. But yeah, pretty cool, all right? We can just spawn this at any point. And what we'll do is we'll hook this up to the actual player so you can see how that works. But I just want to test these each once so that we know that they're working. So now let's change this to hit. Okay, now I should see that little hit thing. Ooh, there we go. And if you'll notice, I mean, it's really subtle, but I do believe it's randomly rotating. Yeah, it is. It's just subtle because it's basically a circle. But yeah, there we go. Every time we hit something now, we could also spawn one of those. And what's nice is all we really need is call one line of code. Most things that we're going to call this effect on will already have a global position, so we won't need to do this. Okay, right? This getting the player is just to test this, but generally one line of code to generate a dust effect. Pretty cool, right? Okay, I want to actually take this dust effect one full circle with our player states real quick, just really quickly, so you have an idea of how you can implement something like this. But then we're going to go ahead and move forward and look at other effects that we can generate. I'm going to open up my player, which I don't have open currently, so let's find him. Player scene. Okay. Now, when I look at my player, what's nice is I can just come into the state and let's take jump, for example. Now, when I jump, I want to play that jump effect. So all I have to do is come in here and we can simply just come into the enter function, right? And I'm just going to go ahead and play back that visual jump effect. So it'll be VisualEffects dot, and then we can say jump dust. And now here we need a position, but we already have a reference to our player, so we can just grab his global position. And now when I run the project, there we go. Every time I jump, it's going to spawn that dust effect. Okay. So that's really straightforward. Now you're definitely, hopefully, seeing the advantage of this kind of effect factory, right? Likewise for the land, I'm going to go ahead and just open probably let's see, let's go back to my player. the fall state. And rather than put it on exit, we have ways where we might exit the fall state that aren't landing. And so what I'm going to do is just, let's see, find the physics process. You can see here, if the player is on the floor, right, this is where we've landed. And so we've got a jump buff timer, or a buffer timer for our jump, and we've got our idle, but we can just put it probably right here. I think at any point, if the player is on the floor during the fall state, then he's going to land or hit the ground. So we can play that dust. So I'm going to say VisualEffects dot land dust. And then, yeah, same thing. We do need to get our position. Okay. Go back to my save scene, run it. It's just a convenient, easy scene to test from. So now I should see a dust when I hit the ground. There we go. Okay. Nice, coming full circle. Pretty easy to implement. Now, obviously, we could tie in sound effects with this as well. Okay. I think that's going to be a good homework assignment for you guys. There's a couple ways we could do sound effects for abilities. We'll explore those throughout this chapter. But if you want to use the audio manager system we built in chapter 3 and just have a way to play back, play a spatial audio of a jump and a land effect, then you can do that. And I do have sound effects provided in that itch.io download, okay? Technically, we've built a successful little factory here, okay? There's things that you can do to improve this. I mean, I've mentioned things like pooling system. So if you're going to have high number of effects, you might want a pooling system so that instead of destroying the effect when it finishes, you just kind of deactivate it and then turn it back on. So you save the cost on instantiating. Godot is really efficient at instantiating these small scenes. So it's not too big a concern, I don't think, for our game. But I do want to kind of talk about and cover a few more things in this video. Now, we're going to be adding another type of effect that we're going to use throughout this chapter. And so we're going to be building that before we get into all of the player abilities, and that's going to be hit particles. Okay, and so what the hit particles is going to do is, like, anytime the player hits something or even the enemy hit the player, we want to be able to have an easy way to emit some particles. And we want the particles to be dynamic and be able to change with the objects that we hit. Okay, so we'll cover that in depth because that's going to be more in depth than just adding a simple function. But in addition, the thing that I do want to do and wrap up in this video was going to be a simple camera shake. Now, technically, this camera shake is breaking the factory pattern, but I've kind of generically named this node to be VisualEffects, and so I'm not personally concerned about it. But if you are, then you can make a separate way to call this. But I'm going to go ahead and just create this camera shake function. It's going to return void. And it's actually going to be extremely simple. What we're going to want is we're going to request a value of how strong this is. So I'll just call this value the strength. Should be a float. And by default, I'm even going to set it to 1. So you can call camera shake and it'll give you a default shake strength. Now, in order for this to work, I'm not going to instantiate a camera, and I'm not even going to grab the camera. I'm going to go ahead and just emit a signal. So up here, I'm just going to say signal camera underscore shook. Is that the right tense? shooked. And I'm going to go ahead and emit that strength value. Okay. So then what that means is if I come back down here, I can just say camera shook dot emit strength. So even though this isn't a factory, it is a nice message, and it's a specific message of a visual type. We could use our message bus system for this, I suppose, but I'm going to use this camera shook dot emit, and now we're going to go over to our camera and we're going to hook it up. Now, if you're following along with me, the camera resides on our player node here. So you can see we've got a camera 2D. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a new script to this. Let's see, attach script. And I'm going to change the folder to be underneath we're in our player folder already, but I'm going to go under scripts. And I'm going to call this player camera instead of camera 2D. Player underscore camera. Okay. We can give it a class name. We may not ever need it, but I generally like to. And then what we can do here is in our ready function, we can connect to that signal that we've got in our visual effects system. So we can say visual effects camera shook dot connect. And then we would need to create a function to handle it. So on camera shook, or, I'm going to call it something different. I'm going to call it apply shake. Not shape, shake. Okay. And I'm going to keep the process function in here. We will use that. But I'm going to go ahead and put in this apply shake. Now, as you recall, we just set this up. So we know that we're emitting a strength. So I'm going to go ahead and just put that here, which is a float. And then we're going to just set up some things. So what we're going to do with this camera shake is we're essentially going to have a way for our camera to just be added. We can add this shake strength at any time, and they could be added multiple over the course of a small period of time. And it's just going to shake the camera, and it'll slowly unshake itself. The shaking will decrease over time, right? So in order for this to work, I'm going to go ahead and set up just a couple variables that we can leverage. So I think we want a shake strength variable that we can use to store this. So this is going to be a float, and it'll be equal to 0 by default. And then I'm going to export two variables that you don't necessarily need to export them, but this way you can edit them in the inspector if you want to. But we're going to have a shake decay rate. So shake underscore decay underscore rate, which is also a float. And I'm going to set it equal to 5. The other export variable we want is a max shake effect or offset. Because we don't want, if you had like the player get hit by 3 enemies, you don't want it to be like a triple shake necessarily. That might be too much. So the max shake offset is also going to be a float. And I'm going to set it to 20, which is kind of high, but you can adjust that as well. Okay. Now what we need to do is when we apply a shake, what we're going to do is we're going to set our shake strength. We're going to adjust it. So it's going to become equal to, and we're going to say min. Okay, let's look at this min function here. Returns the minimum of the given numeric values. This function can take any number of arguments. So you just pass in some numbers to give you the smallest one. Okay. Now you could make this additive where you say shake strength plus equals or something like that. There's a lot of ways you could adjust this strength, so you can play with that and have fun. But I'm just going to take this strength that we pass in and use this min function to make sure it's not greater than the maximum shake offset, like that. And voila, that's all I'm going to do here. So anytime the VisualEffects emits that signal, I'm just going to take that strength and apply it to this variable up here. So then you're probably wondering how this all works. And essentially it's all going to happen in the process function. Because we want this camera to be moving and be able to handle this on its own, here within the process, we'll just react to the shake value and we'll decrease it over time. So the first thing that we can start with, I suppose, is the offset. So let's say offset, which is a camera value. If I select my camera and look at the offset, that's this right here. And all that does is it offsets it from its center. Pros and cons of using this. The pro is it doesn't move your camera position. So this won't interfere with other camera position altering functionality you may have, like camera follow scripts and things like that. Downside to the offset is it can push it outside of the bounds that we've set on our camera. So like on our level bound system where we constrain the camera, if your shake pushes it outside the bounds, you might see past the edges of your screen. And so what you can kind of resolve that by simply making sure you've got, some tiles around the outside of your camera border like I've got. But if your tiles ended right here on this line and you shook the camera, you'd probably see gray, right? You'd see this background or whatever. That would look gross. So one downside, pretty easy to avoid, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. But it's worth noting, right? So the offset of our camera is going to equal a vector 2, because it is a vector 2, right? We just looked at that property on our player. I'm having allergies today. So offset right here. Okay, so we're going to set this, and I'm going to go ahead and extend this out because I want extra space for each of these lines. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get a random range, and it's a random F as a float. And we're going to take essentially our shake strength and get a random range negative or positive, okay? So we're going to say negative shake strength or positive shake strength. And then we're just going to do this one more time on the y-axis. Exact bit of code. Just make sure you get that comma there. Okay, so we're setting a random offset. And so you can see as our shake strength gets bigger, it's going to be moving more. Otherwise, it's going to get close to 0. And then what we can do down here is just take our shake strength and we can start lerping it towards 0. Okay, so what lerp does, it linearly interpolates between two values, which means like if you were to make a graph, like a graph chart, and it was from 0 to 1, it's going to just move along that line, or in our case, down towards 0. Okay, so we're just going to use this. You provide some values, and it'll smooth between them essentially. So the first value we want is our current shake strength. Let's just get that tooltip again. So it's from, and then to, and then await. Okay, so shake strength is our from. Our to value, where we're heading towards, is 0. And then I guess this last piece, the wait, what we're going to do is this is where we're going to use our shake decay rate. And we also need to multiply this by delta, okay, which we have in our process function, because this is frame rate dependent adjustments happening here. Okay, so our shake rate's going to adjust. And we don't have a way to call this yet, but let's just come into our scene here. Let's see, that's not the one I want. I want player HUD. We've got this button. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate a button. I don't know if this is going to be the same script on both of these. I don't think it is. So I'm going to take this, and I don't need a player reference to test this one. I just want to shake the screen. So camera shake. And I'm not even going to pass in a value. I'm going to leave it at the default of 1. Let's change this to test shake. And I'm going to go ahead and run a scene, and let's see if this shake works. Burp, burp, error. Oh, okay. I think it's having a problem. Is it having a problem with this right here? It's saying it can't convert an int or use an int in place of a float. Shake strength should be a float. So I think it was just that 0. So I add a 0.0 to it to make sure it's a float. I hope that fixes it. Let's try that again. Okay, test shake. I don't know how well you guys can see the shake. It's a pretty high frame rate shake, but it's working. So if I wanted to come back to my script here, and by the way, where is that player HUD? I didn't move this new button. There we go. Let's move it down here. And then we'll go back to this button. Oh yeah, look, the code is the same on both those buttons because I duplicated it. My bad. That's okay. I guess we don't need one of these. I'm just going to go ahead and delete the first button. Okay, only one button. Now I could increase this to like 10, and I think I may need to run this scene again. I changed a lot by deleting things. Boom, there you go, much bigger shake. Okay, but now you get a sense of how this is going to work, right? So anytime the player takes damage or lands after a big thing, or something, anything that might shake the screen, it's just one line of code to add the shake. Okay, pretty cool. So there we go. We've managed to create a nice simple factory for some effects. We've created this screen shake effect on top of the dust effects, and we've also gone ahead and tied in the dust effects to our player, okay, so that we've got that on our jump and land. So I hope this is giving you kind of some insight into how we're going to be leveraging these features moving forward. In the next video, we're going to create that particle effect because it's a little bit more involved. I want to keep it separated into its own video. So it's going to be kind of like this episode is like 2 parts because technically it's kind of one episode really. But I hope you guys have learned something new. Go ahead and drop a comment below if you have questions or just want to help support me. And of course, subscribe if you want to see what's coming next. If you are new to my channel and want to consider supporting me on Patreon, then you're welcome to do so. I've got a few extra perks and benefits for my Patreon supporters. One of those is if you are at the higher tier, if you are a Pixel Adventurer supporter, then you have access to the GitHub code repository for this project, as well as some extra A-Sprite files that I'm throwing in. But otherwise, if you're just happy to be here to follow along and learn, then go ahead and drop that like, and we'll see you next time. And for those of you following along who really want to learn, let me give you a homework assignment. So what I want you to do, if you've come this far, you've probably got your visual effects tied into your jump and your land. I want you guys to figure out how you're going to get an audio effect tied into that. I already mentioned one possible solution earlier in the video where you could use the audio manager system that we built in chapter 3 to play a spatial sound. Otherwise, you could try something like adding a audio player 2D to your player, and you could try triggering that from your state. And it's going to be basically in the same branch of code where you have the dust effect happening, right? So if you're new, go ahead and try that out. That's going to help you think outside the box and wrap your mind around how the state machine and our player is going to work. And it's going to get you more prepared to work with the different states that we're going to be creating throughout this chapter.